Hi everyone, welcome to Extra Credit, and today we're going to be talking about bias and perspective in history. Now, bias is kind of a hard word to explain, but a dictionary definition would be prejudice against a group, person, or thing compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Now, that might be a bit over our heads, so a simpler definition could be when you view something either positively or negatively, not based on facts, but based on feelings. Or if that's still too confusing, we could put it in grade 8 language and say that bias is when you like something or you don't like something like. 15 centuries of the English language, and this is what we've come to. So a few years ago, my brother and his wife took a trip to the Southeast Asian country of Vietnam. While they were there, one of the things they wanted to learn about was this famous war that took place in the 1960s involving Vietnam and the United States. But the interesting thing was that as they toured the country, they didn't find any museums at all that talked about the Vietnam War. Instead, they were all talking about this thing called the American War, which I had never heard of before until I was like, wait, right. You see, when we study history, we're used to looking at it through one simple lens or perspective, usually determined by the culture or place that we come from. So, for example, when you're from America, it's the Vietnam War because it was your country fighting against Vietnam. Actually, it's the South Vietnamese supported by your country fighting against the North Vietnamese supported by the Soviet Union, but details. But one of the things this taught me about history was realizing that every historical event can be seen from multiple perspectives. Last time we saw that the goal of studying history is not to judge the past, but to understand the past, to learn from it. And in order to do that, we need to be able to see the past from as many viewpoints as possible. This is called taking the perspective of the other. No, not the others, the other. Yeah, that's good. The other just means anyone whose perspective is different from yours. For example, there's this old Indian folk tale about a bunch of blind men gathering around an elephant, and they can't see it, but they can each feel a different part of it, and they're trying to figure out what kind of thing it is. So the guy feeling the trunk thinks it's a snake, the guy feeling the leg thinks it's a tree, the guy feeling the tail thinks it's a rope, and the guy getting gored by the tusk is like, ah. So who was right? Well, it's not really about who was right or wrong, it's about perspective. They were all seeing part of the truth, but none of them were seeing the full truth. And that's how it is when we study history, because we all bring our own bias to the past, and we tend to see events a certain way. Not that that's wrong, but it's only one way of seeing things. And that leaves us with an understanding of history that's not wrong, but it's certainly incomplete. To get back to that first example, the Vietnam War was actually part of a much longer running conflict between the US and the Soviet Union called the Cold War. And during the Cold War, the Americans were terrified that those communist Russians were going to nuke them.
We must be ready all the time for the atomic bomb. Duck and cover. Duck and cover.
And so in schools, kids would actually do drills where they would hide under their desks to protect themselves in the event of a nuclear attack. Yeah, because a desk is really going to protect you from a nuke. That's what fridges are for. But what's interesting is I once talked to an American teacher who had spent time teaching in Russia after the Cold War was over. And he was telling his students about how scared he and the rest of the Americans were about the Russians and about nuclear war. And what was really interesting was his students were like, seriously, man? We were terrified of you guys, because your country is the only one that's ever actually used a nuclear weapon. Which is true. America, to this day, is the only country in the world ever to use a nuclear weapon against another country, when they ended World War II by bombing 2 Japanese cities. But this is why it's so crucial to learn about events from more than one perspective, because you miss so much of the truth and richness of history if you only see things through one lens. And there are so many other examples we could talk about. For example, in the country of Israel, May 14th, 1948 is called their Independence Day because this is when Israel fought off 5 different invading Arab nations and declared their independence as a country. They won that war, and so for them that's a day of victory and celebration. However, the Arabs have another word for that day. They call it the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. For them, that day has a very different legacy. Or closer to home, take the historical figure of Louis Riel, who is the founder of the province of Manitoba. From the perspective of the Métis people and many people nowadays in Manitoba, Riel was a hero who stood up for Métis rights and the French language and helped lead his people to a better future. But to the Canadian government at the time, he was considered a traitor and worthy of death, which is why he was hanged. And it gets way more complex than this, because most things from the past can't just be seen from two different lenses, but through multiple lenses. If you remember from last week, we talked about how foot binding in China had so many different meanings attached to it. It was a form of expressing beauty, national pride, but it could also be seen as a type of abuse and oppression. And again, studying history is not about figuring out which of those perspectives is the right one, it's about understanding that there are multiple perspectives and that they each have something to teach us. See, history is not a multiple choice test that's got one right answer. Or if it is, it's one of those evil ones in university where none of the above is somehow above all of the above. Figure that one out. Instead, think about history as a jewel with 1,000 faces, and each one reflects a new light. I'll take 10 points to Gryffindor for that metaphor. And the beauty of seeing history this way is that it not only increases our understanding of the past, but it also increases our empathy and expands our worldview. It helps us to see things from a new perspective, and that's never a bad thing. It's kind of like when you reread the Harry Potter series after discovering that Snape is actually a good guy the whole time. Because the first time through you're like, wow, this guy's an evil jerk. And then the second time through you're like, wow, he's still an evil jerk. But he loved Harry's mom! Hey everyone, thanks again for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode today. I had a lot of fun making it as usual. In the spirit of today's episode, your challenge for this week is to find out what World War II is called in Russia. This is probably going to be the last episode for a little bit. I've got to take some time off, do some script writing, get some new ideas going. So hopefully you can watch and rewatch these and share these with your friends and family. As always, take care of yourselves, have a great day, and we will see you right back here next time.